Now there are other things we could do to optimize the scene. Doing depth of field in post would be one. Restricting the depth of our refractive materials would be another that wouldn't, in our case, change the image too much. Putting down the transparency levels to 10 might help a bit too in this case. Rendering this out and we get a savings of 4 minutes. And 4 minutes is not nothing, so it's a little bit better, but another way to get rid of the flickering would be to use brute force in your primary engine and leave the light cache for secondary bounces. This yields no flickering at all, but we do get some minor light leaks. The render times for this setup shot up to 58 minutes a frame. The light cache is based on the original settings. And just to show you why it's a bad idea to use light cache only, even though it renders really fast at 6 minutes a frame, here's an animation of that. We'd have to increase the subdivision so high to get good results, and at that point we would get slow renders. To test out Vray's new adaptive settings in the light cache rollout, if you remember me mentioning it before, I changed the settings back to the one where we got some flickering and enabled it and left all the other settings alone. Here's the render, and it's down to 7 minutes a frame. As you can see, the flickering is gone, except we got some light spills that flicker just a tiny bit. Increasing the retrace parameter, which is meant to prevent light leaks, might help this, so it's something for you to experiment with. In this case, if we'd want to be sneaky, since we're saving so much render time, we could do a region render where the light leaks are happening with the higher settings and then comp the two together and still save a lot of rendering time. If the camera was moving, we could use a render mask, also a new feature in Vray 3. It certainly looks like the adaptive feature in the light cache has a promising future. So the last thing I said that I was going to cover is how to save the GI caches. And if we go to our GI tab here and the radiance map, the first thing I'm going to do is lower these samples quite a bit because we don't need that many. So I'm going to do 50 and 20, -3 here. And I'm going to go to light cache and I'm going to set that to 1500. And this is the section here that you save the GI caches. So what I would do is for the first demonstration, I'm just going to save a single frame. And I'm going to pick a place on my hard drive. And I'm going to do the same thing for the light cache. And make sure that they're both set to single frame. I'm going to go to Vray here and global switches and do don't render final image. I'm also going to bring these down. So now I can render this and it will only render the GI passes. So first it's going to render the light cache and then it's going to generate the radiance cache. And now it's done. So what I can do now is close this and go to my GI settings, and instead of single frame here in my radiance map, I will do from file and select the file that I saved. And the same thing with the light cache, I will do from file and select my file. So I will go to Vray and uncheck don't render final image. And now that I render, you can see that it won't generate the GI passes, because they're reading it from disks, so it doesn't have to go through that phase anymore. So this may be useful for an example, if you want to mess around with the settings in the Vray tab, like the image sampler and stuff like that, and see how much that affects render time and what kind of gains you get from doing different things in there. So storing the GI cache for a single frame can be useful. And the other thing that you can do with this is that you can also render this at a higher resolution, and it will still work as long as the camera and everything is in the same place. So that will basically be like undersampling the GI, and it would still work. So that's another thing that you could do. Now I'm gonna stop this render. And the more useful thing that you can do with saving the GI caches is that you can do multi-frame incremental and also progressive path tracing, and then save it to, I'm gonna leave it at the same places, and here and here. So what this does is that it, in an animated scenario where only the camera is moving, like in this scenario, it's only gonna generate samples that are new in the scene. I have a moving sphere here, so I should probably hide that, because it's mostly only good for moving cameras. Sometimes you can get away with having moving objects in your scene, and you can test that just for a few frames, like 10-20 frames at a lower resolution, and see if you get any artifacts. But generally, as a rule of thumb, it's just good for camera moves. So the other major benefit by doing it this way is that you will get no flicker in your render. So if I now have these settings set up like this, and go to Vray again and make sure I check don't render final image, I go to common and I render from my whole animation, and I set to render every 10th frame, because it's only generating new samples in the scene where the camera is. So if I go from 20 to 30, it's only going to generate new samples in the areas that it hasn't seen yet. In the areas that it has seen, it won't do. It will just quickly